I might just introduce myself a little bit because I think the context is kind of necessary for this. So basically, I finished my PhD in about 2019. I was looking at the closure of Leigh Creek coal mine in South Australia, based in the Sustainable Minerals Institute in the Centre of Mine Land Rehabilitation. From there, I moved to QUT and the business school, and I was looking at the Adani Carmichael coal mine and the approvals processes that went through. So we're looking at kind of multi-perspectival stakeholder views, understanding different people's understandings of space and landscape, and the decision-making processes that were being made. And now I've just moved to University of Wollongong, and I'm doing a postdoc there on Port Kembla, which is a major industrial port in the area. And I've kind of shifted a bit away from my very clear-cut focus on coal mining and broadening it over outwards towards industrial landscapes more generally, understanding kind of commodity flows and containment, and kind of playing with these ideas of containment and leakage, and particularly kind of invisible chemicals and things that operate within ports in order to make commodities function within the supply chain. So that's a little bit of like general background, but essentially what this means is that I've been doing a lot of thinking about inhumans, nonhumans, and quite specifically the underground. So this is kind of a summary of some of my thoughts that I've been working through. Yeah. So while I've kind of been moving towards this kind of area, this understanding of the underground and how you can understand matter that you can't see, I've also been, is this okay? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Moving into kind of more than human geography. So I identify as a human geographer. So while I'm kind of focusing on methods within this, I don't really view it as a totally separate relationship with theory, but as kind of two sides of the same coin, as making up kind of the material center of the coin. So within this talk, they twist together as I think through how we work with the underground. And this thinking is an important stage for underground research because it offers the chance not just to understand what it is that we're doing, but also to think about why and what's at stake. So matter matters. Surface and subsurface relations are dynamic and ongoing. The way particular underground sites intersect with our legal, social, cultural, and political realities has very real and specific consequences for futures, both above and below the ground. The materiality of undergrounds can and is used to reinforce established systems and processes, and to limit radical planning and community action. When knowledge becomes uneven, it opens gaps for it to be used as an excuse not to do something like spend money on rehabilitation. Inaction by those in possession of knowledge can also become obscured. Undergrounds can become leaky and toxic when we don't have appropriate systems of accountability or oversight in place. The subsurface can also be misrepresented when knowledge is privatized or kept secret. There's no distinguishing between fact and fiction when data isn't made public or interpretable to the public. So I'm thinking particularly here about the Adani Carmichael coal mines debate, which centered in a legal sense, which centered on aquifers. So essentially within the Land Court of Queensland, the company and the environmental scientists who were working as opposing expert witnesses produced competing interpretations of the impact of the mine's operations on the surrounding groundwater. So the judge, who was a non-scientist, had to effectively guess which was a truthful interpretation of the data. So to understand the underground and how it impacts and intersects with lives and livelihoods, we need to look closely at our methods for encountering and interpreting it. We also need to understand where the barriers lie, the barriers to shared knowledge lie, so that we can find ways to overcome them. I'll slow down. I feel like I'm going really fast. Sorry. So the underground is defined generally as being beneath the surface of the ground. But in this talk, I'm particularly focused on depths below the organic layer and surface topsoils. So these top layers are pretty readily accessible through minor gardening or renovation works, and are imbued with high levels of bios, which Kate kind of talked about a lot yesterday, which was great, or living material that can easily become the focus of more than human research inquiries. The layers below this offer a range of methodological challenges to humanities researchers that I'm aiming to address, with a particular emphasis on the difficulty getting access to these areas in order to conduct research with the underground as a non-human participant. As a starting point, I ask, how is it that we do and can place ourselves into proximity with geological agents? So within this one question are several methodological avenues distinct to subterranean research, but the most pressing of these is how methods that have been developed to address the broader bios are or aren't relevant to research centered on the geos. So Zoe Todd's an amazing Indigenous scholar from Canada, geography. She offers very pragmatic advice on how to ask the fish what they've discovered. She suggests that we instead listen to the fish in the way that they communicate to us, the way they withdraw from unsuitable or damaged habitats over the course of the last several hundred years of colonial destruction of habitats, or their fishy return when habitats are repaired. So this gives us an opening to begin thinking about the possibilities for listening to and communicating with the underground. Factors such as the slowness of geomorphic change, the inaccessibility of much of the underground, and its corresponding denseness of material. Our difficulty making sound observations about its material characteristics without engaging deeply in soil science or geology, which I am starting to think maybe we should be doing that a little bit more. And even the way that the subsurface organizes as a collective that's both granular and vast complicate such communications and make it difficult for us to interpret the underground in the same way that we might fish. So within my own work, I've relied really heavily on a reflective period after my fieldwork. And this is a process of finding the underground in the mundane or the everyday, where its presence is so ubiquitous that it's blindingly obvious. So to expand on this a little bit, I'll focus briefly on one of my fieldwork examples and how something might become mundane in the first place. Between 2016 and 2018, I undertook field interviews in Lee Creek coal mine, this is my PhD, in South Australia. I was looking at the closure process and asking participants what they thought should happen to the mining landscape. And during that time, I was introduced to spontaneous combustion of coal as an everyday knowledge that was held by locals, by government, and also by industry. SponCom, as these stakeholders call it, often occurs as the result of exposing coal to oxygen through human disturbances such as mining. A buildup of heat leads the coal to self-ignite, causing invisible sinkholes and hidden hotspots where temperatures in excess of 600 degrees Celsius occur just below the surface of the Earth. So ubiquitous was SponCom that I absorbed an understanding of the way that it occupied the subsurface of the mine site throughout my interviews, as well as simply through staying and interacting with people within the fieldwork area. Its socio-political influence quickly became normalized, and I accepted it as a simple fact of the mine site. This normalization was a perfect example of the blindingly obvious. The presence of SponCom radically altered my interviewing because it immediately became clear that I couldn't ask people extensive questions about potential post-mining landscape designs when they didn't believe that there could be a post-mining landscape that was safe enough for people to use. The threat of SponCom controlled who was able to access the mine site across many decades. And it also colluded with risk management discourses to restrict possible futures for the mine site following its closure. It was only after a year of musing on this data, however, that I realized it could be understood as a subterranean, non-human, and a socio-political actor. So when I was writing up my case study, I realized that the dead end that I'd encountered was a story in its own right. And I hadn't been able to anticipate it because it's not a known phenomenon outside of the industry and the immediate locality of a coal mine. And one of the main reasons that it took so long to register is because of the geological nature. The subterranean is subtle, and it's often difficult to conceive of as an active, agential, non-human. Spontaneous combustion of coal is a phenomenon, an action, and a burning of coal seams under the ground or coal remnants in waste rock piles. It's so strikingly different to the non-humans that we find in animals or plant lives as self-contained individuals that form part of larger assemblages or are formed of assemblages. So the question was then, how is it possible to undertake participatory or collaborative research with a non-human entity that I don't know exists at the beginning of the research and fieldwork journey, and that I can't recognize until years have passed following data collection? So one possible angle of critique regarding my method process from a modern human perspective is that I began with a case study site instead of listening to the earth and the way that it communicates. Should I have built on Zoe Todd's withdrawals or returns in order to find the subsurface as a non-human that I could engage regardless of locality? It's possible to see how you might be able to follow an aquifer's depletion as a result of human intervention, or to trace historical mineral movements through fossil records as a form of participatory research. But one of the main barriers to this kind of work is the need to fix on a specific site in order to gain both access to the underground and knowledge of it. So I'm going to turn to a paper by Andrea Ballestero, that focuses on the visibility of aquifers in Costa Rica to explore this dilemma further. So Ballesteros examines how the visual has been essentialized within the literature and the politics of verticality. And so she explores in her paper what it means for a particular remote sensing technology to use light to create a record of the texture of the underground. The observations that Ballesteros produces are explicitly the result of a series of interactions with a remote sensing expert brought in by the Costa Rican government to undertake the work of mapping Costa Rica's groundwater. I think this is not the exact expert, but a simulation. Ballesteros' insightful observations into remote sensing as a cross-modal form of touching the light, rather than simply seeing, are filtered through the explanations of industry personnel. Similarly, her access to the data itself relies on access to the people who collect it. So, industry remains a gatekeeper to underground knowledge. Specifically, industry possesses access to technology and the skills necessary to interpret the kind of data that can be collected on the underground. Further, the collection and analysis of data and the availability of people who are able and willing to interpret it accessibly relies entirely on there being a site of interest in the first, and this is usually outside of the control of the researcher. In order to access the underground, more than human researchers are similarly bound to specific sites and the industry personnel within them. These sites often double as the only point of physical access to potential non-human subjects, as in the case of a mine or an infrastructure project such as tunnels. Access is strictly controlled for occupational health and safety, and also IP reasons, and often quite frequently PR reasons. Physical or remote access to vibrant, sociopolitically active subterranean non-humans is a daunting task without forming an alliance or agreement of some kind with industry. And then this can become tricky if the researcher is looking to do critical work. A further advantage of focusing on sites of excavation is that they're also where the human can interject themselves into lithic contexts. Excavation of the earth is central to the Anthropocenic project of accelerating geomorphic shifts. It's a disruption to lithic-centric timescales, the long durée of sedimentation and erosion. It's also an opportunity to experience movements of the earth within human timescales. So as one tunneling professional explained in an interview with Marilu Melou-Zarita, who's been brought up a few times, I think, during the symposium at UNSW, says that sort of time frame is like a billion years time frame, but with movements that are occurring in where you dig into the earth as it moves and you actually hear it and you feel it. So this experience of being within the earth during tunneling and sensing its movements in response to extraction is surely the closest that we can get to understanding both lithic motions and timescales from the perspective of underground non-humans. Where a cave is a preformed absence of the underground, the process of excavation is instead the act of forming a cave. So this is the work of removing the density of the earth. It's a kind of uncovering of the subterranean that feels like it should facilitate immersion into the matter of the underground, dirt under the fingernails. But the reality of the situation is that this kind of proximity to extracted matter is always limited in time and access. So I've personally tried to gain access to multiple mine sites, and it's always a complicated dance of proving the value of your research while demonstrating political neutrality or sympathy towards the industry. And the politically fraught position of excavation within our increasingly environmentally conscious society is keenly felt by miners themselves. And it prompts a closing off of the site of excavation, both visually and physically, wherever possible. So one of the main points I've made within this is that access to the lively underground is hard to come by. The second is that without this access, it becomes difficult to listen to subterranean non-humans. The third is that subterranean non-humans are strikingly different in character to surface bios. And even if we can access the underground, it's hard to notice it. It's crucial that we begin to address some of these problems because knowing the underground is the first step towards taking charge of our relationship with it, wresting it out of the hands of industry and government alone. To do this work, we need to start by understanding the fundamental differences between surface bios and subsurface geos in research methods and in disciplinary ambitions. So one size does not fit all non-humans. As we advance underground research, I hope we can give ourselves some leeway to find new methods and to expand existing ones that work with the specific characteristics of our non-human subjects and colleagues. Thank you.